Today's speaker is Professor Baskar Ganapathysubramanian from Iowa State University. Just to tell you a little bit about his background, he is the Anderlich Professor of Engineering at Iowa State University, received his BTech from IIT Madras and a PhD from Cornell University. He directs a computational sustainability group and has a lot of varied interests, including scientific computing, applied mathematics, and machine learning with applications in food, energy, and healthcare systems. And finally, he's the director of the NSF USDA-funded AI Institute for Resilient Architecture, which is a multi-institutional project focused on user-inspired AI developments. So if you go ahead and share your screen, Baskar, I think you can, yeah.
Can you hear me?
I'll go over to Baskar, yeah.
Thank you, Irina, for the opportunity to present and for also pronouncing my last name well. So I have the privilege of having one of the longest last names at Iowa State University. And usually when my usual joke is when I teach, I have a pop quiz and I ask my students, what is your instructor's last name? And they usually struggle with that. So today I'm going to be talking about some of the work that my group, along with a whole bunch of collaborators, have been working on in terms of how do we bring in computational mechanics for crop design, and why is this? This is a critical problem, and this is also a very fertile problem, no pun intended, for where computational mechanics can play a critical role. We are expected to see our population grow to about 10 billion people that we have to feed by 2050, and this population is a lot of the population is going to grow beyond into the middle class, and so the calorific demands are going to be increasing. So we expect about 30 to 70% more calories to feed this extra 2 to 3 billion people. And then there's limits on agricultural inputs, right? So, and then with climate change and labor shortages, there is feeding essentially a larger, richer world means we need to increase our food production by up to half again, right? Or maybe even double again with a finite amount of land. And one of the key things is that food security is national security, right? So if you, and this is patently obvious. And so the figure on the top right here that you see is, I live in Iowa, and Iowa along with Illinois is one of the largest producers of corn. And so this is essentially what is the average yield of corn. This is in terms of some volume bushels per acre. And you see, since the 1930s, you see a linear almost increase in the amount of productivity. And this has been caused by several paradigm shifts. In the 1930s, you have this introduction of statistical methods of breeding, and that has essentially resulted in a big jump in improvement. And then after that, there were these notions of double crossing, single crossing of breeding that essentially resulted in further improvements. And then since the early 2000s, there's been the biotech and gene-based, biology-based methods to improve the productivity. But what you see on the far right figure is to maintain this continuous rate of constant rate of growth, you need increasing amounts of investments. And this is potentially not sustainable. And so what we need is another paradigm shift of increasing the amount of productivity. And I strongly feel that computational mechanics and AI can be the enabler here. And so this focus that I'm going to be talking about, how do we essentially use computational tools, right, and computational mechanics to come up with designer plants that our plant breeding colleagues can then go and try to replicate in the real world, is part of one of the themes of an institute that I lead, which is one of the 25 AI institutes, and is one of the 5 that's focused on AI for agriculture. And our focus here is on IRA is to come up with AI tools that integrate knowledge and data. And this should resonate with this community here, our community here, in terms of the recent uptick in scientific machine learning. We explore foundational questions in AI, but through the lens of agriculture applications. And our goal is to provide tools, products, and value to agriculture ecosystem broadly, with a focus on US farmers. So we've been working on several moonshots, and today, in the context of this talk, I'm going to be focusing on the moonshot on the far right. And this moonshot is how can we build 3D geometric digital twins or geometric twins with the goal of designing or enhancing the breeding, accelerating the breeding pipeline to come up with crops that are more resilient to climate change, that are more productive with minimal amounts of input. And so the overarching question, the overarching theme here is that geometry essentially drives yield and performance. And so plant health, plant yield depends on how essentially the leaves capture light, how strong the stalk is to prevent lodging or prevent failure, structural failure under high wind loads or under water logging. And then especially now, the goal, at least in commercial planting, commercial agriculture, is to pack more and more plants closer and closer together. So understanding the interaction between these plants and to essentially minimize these disadvantageous interactions and maximizing the advantageous interactions to maximize yield and performance is key. And so the overarching theme, if you will, in all these is mechanics and physical phenomena, right? So if you consider, if you imagine a plant out in either in your a potted plant or a plant in your garden, or if you have near agricultural land, the plants in the field there's a lot of interesting mechanics there, right? So wind affects the load on these plants. There is light radiation, right? So photosynthesis essentially depends on three things: how much light is intercepted by the plant here. In this case, you see an image of a representative cornfield. How much light is intercepted by each of the leaves? How much water is available per plant? And essentially how much carbon dioxide is available across the leaves, right? So this is essentially the total amount of photosynthesis is a product of non-trivial product of the availability of light, water, and carbon dioxide, along with biochemistry that depends on temperature, right? And so being a computational mechanician, the question that we ask ourselves is, can we enable our breeding colleagues by designing an ideal plant in silico, right? And so the hypothesis is that can AI-enabled 3D simulations of plants, can they guide breeding efforts, right? So and essentially we can given this framework, we can test a variety of what-if scenarios. What if I plant double the number of plants per acre? What if the plants have this kind of architecture? We can identify virtual ideotypes. Ideotypes is essentially a locally optimal architecture that breeders can then target for in their either conventional breeding or using the recent gene editing CRISPR-Cas based technology. And so how does computational mechanics fit into this, right? So there is the ability to represent complex structures, right? And then once you have a complex structure of an individual plant, we have the ability to vary the architectural traits, right? So the number of leaves, the size, the shape, the location of the leaves, the general architecture of the plant. Then we are able to place this in a virtual field setting, right? So what is the distance between the plants in terms of the plant-to-plant distance, how are the rows of plants, the pattern of the rows of plants arranged, and so on. And then once you have this virtual field, you can then perform multiphysics simulations. And multiphysics simulations here start from, can I model the airflow through the canopy in exquisite detail? Can I identify the temperature distributions? Can I identify what the carbon dioxide distributions are going to be? And then can I identify what the light interception across the growing period is going to be? Once I am able to model these PDEs, if you will, across this complex geometric field, I can then evaluate my quantities of interest, right? And here, quantities of interest could be how much light is intercepting my leaf area, what is my total amount of photosynthesis, what is perhaps my structural stability, right? Or I could have a virtual robot go through my fields and it is interrogating the plants. So what is the response of to the stimuli, essentially, of this virtual robot going through my field, right? And then I can perform, then putting this all together, once I have a response of the estimating the quantity of interest, I can then wrap it around shape optimization, for instance, and design the plant architecture, a true ideotype, essentially, that extremizes this quantity of interest. And so this is not something very new, right? So breeders and folks in the agriculture domain have been thinking about it for hundreds, if not thousands of years. But in the last decade or in the last century or so, there has been a rich history of mechanistic models, right? So, but most of these mechanistic models have historically been limited to 1 dimensions or 2 dimensions. Essentially, you have a lumped model of a plant where you replace all the leaves by one leaf called that represents something called the leaf area index. You have one stem that represents one single stem that you have a resistive element that looks at water transport, and so on. And so with the advances in sensing, imaging, and machine learning, we think that this is a ripe area where computational mechanics can play a critical role, right? And so if I want to model the full 3D architecture of the plant in its full glory, how can we do it, right? How can we as a community do it? And thinking about this, we have identified 3 challenges, if you will, and I'm going to talk about how our approach to resolve each of these challenges in the next 30, 40 minutes, right? And so the first challenge is essentially, how do we quickly reconstruct and represent a complex 3D structure? In this case, this complex 3D structure, if you notice, has thin, slender structures, right? Can self-intersect, and essentially you have to do this at scale, right? So we are looking at, if you're looking at breeding, you want to try out multiple varieties, all with different architectures, and how do you quickly and compactly represent and reconstruct this structure? Second is, once you're able to represent this complex 3D structure, how do we automatically perform multiphysics analysis on this complex 3D structure? And then finally, how do you efficiently explore and design in this high dimensional space, right? So once I have the representation, once I have the analysis, how do I essentially go and perform design over this space, right? And so let's look at the first challenge. How do we quickly reconstruct and compactly represent these complex 3D structures? So again, this is over the past 2 decades or so, there have been a variety of methods, both classical as well as more recently AI-enabled methods of reconstructing the 3D structure. And you can do 3D reconstruction in very controlled environments, but agriculture offers the opportunity, essentially, and the challenge to do this in the field setting where there's occlusion, variation in light, there is a lot of uncertainties and variabilities. And so we tried out a bunch of techniques, right? So with my experimental colleagues, and one of the best techniques was what is called LiDAR-based imaging. What you see here is essentially a more controlled experiment where we got in a diverse variety of maize plants into indoor, and we were able to image it. This is fairly expensive to do, both from an investment perspective as well as from a person-hour perspective. But recently, in the past 3 years, there's been amazing advances in AI-enabled approaches, specifically neural radiance fields that allow you to just walk a camera through a field and train a neural network in what is called view synthesis, which I'll quickly explain in the next slide. And you're able to come up with very high fidelity representations of complex geometric objects in the wild, right? And so an example of this is, you see here, one of our students walked around a maize plant and took a video. And then this approach is called view synthesis. View synthesis is given a set of views of an object from a finite number of poses. Can you train a machine learning model, or can you train a model? And it happens to be that machine learning neural networks are very good at this. To predict what the pose is in what the image will look like in some unseen poses. So given a pose X, Y, Z location and viewing angle theta phi, can you tell what if you look at the scene from that cast array, what is going to be the RGB and the density along the tree? Once you have this is the view synthesis problem, you can actually, based on what the density is, you can actually reconstruct very quickly what by rastering through and identifying where the density is high, what the object looks like. So the object, the figure here is actually the ground truth LiDAR representation, and the figure on the right here is essentially what we get from this neural radiance field-based reconstruction of the 3D object. And so this very quickly, right? So this is given a set of views, you can actually train a neural network to either represent the reconstruction in terms of points or a mesh. But there are challenges to this, right? So this is still, that's why this is one approach, and there are still opportunities for the community to contribute here. How can we reduce the training times? How can you obtain a watertight mesh? Looking at slender objects has been challenging. Most of the work in the community, in the AI community, in the vision community, has been focused on large objects like bridges, buildings, and non-slender objects. And in agriculture, leaves essentially are a slender object, so this gives us a lot of opportunities. But there's several of students in our broader group. In this case, Anushrut has been leading in bringing. How do you bring in topological constraints essentially to reconstruct these thin structures? And so we are, as you see on the figures, we are able to reconstruct very, very complex architectures, and we are also able to do this in the wild, in the field setting, right? And so one of the things that we strongly believe in is the ability, is our ability to create these data sets and provide them to the community to play around with. As I'll make the case in the last couple of slides, this is there are a lot of problems and opportunities for the computational mechanics community to contribute here. And so as part of this, we open up a lot of our codes and our data sets. So now that's a one clear way in which we can reconstruct, if you will, a 3D object, especially a 3D object of agricultural relevance. Now, given this process of 3D reconstruction, neural process, fast process of 3D reconstruction, which 3D representation is ideal for downstream analysis, right? And which representation is ideal for design, right? And so we can think of from a mechanics, from a computational science perspective, I have multiple ways in which I can represent this. An object as a point cloud, object as a triangle soup, object as a CAD model, and object essentially as an implicit representation. And so some of the desiderata, right? What are the characteristics that we need essentially helped us think through what method should we focus on, right? Some of the characteristics of the analysis pipeline essentially is we need a representation of the complex object that is low memory footprint, right? And so triangle soups potentially may be out, right? If I have thousands or tens of thousands of plants in my field, I could get hundreds of millions to billions of triangle soups. Then the question of domain decomposition and load balancing across processors becomes a major issue. So we want something that's low memory footprint. And then the ability to represent complex topology at multiple resolutions also is something that we really care about. And then the third thing that only started occurring to us recently was this algorithmic alignment with a reconstruction process. Reconstruction process is essentially based on using neural networks for neural reconstruction, neural radiance fields. So can we design an approach that is aligned with this reconstruction? Similarly, from a design perspective, once you're able to do the analysis, we want, from a design perspective, we want something that's low dimensional, especially our breeding colleagues want something that's explainable, right? So you say, oh, if you change this leaf angle by 20 degrees, you'll perhaps get better response or better yield, is much more easier for them to run with. And so, at least for now, we think these two methods, right? This notion of implicit representations, and then this notion of procedural representation or NURBS-based, CAD-based representation is ideal for the NURBS-based representation is ideal for design, and then implicit representation is ideal for fast analysis. And let me explain quickly how we are using each of these. So this is something that most of you may be very familiar with. We use this procedural representation, right? We convert the model of a canonical maize plant into simply a CAD model. And CAD model is represented by nodes, and each node essentially represents one part of the object here. And by changing this low dimensional set of points, we can actually change the size, the shape, the location, the topology essentially of the leaf, right? And so, in the interest of time, this is something that we understand well. So I'm going to quickly move over. And but the key thing here is that if I need this procedural representation and I have other representations, we spent some time figuring out how to map. Essentially, if I have a point cloud data set, this is the point cloud data set, how do I actually come up with a procedural representation of this? And so my student Mozgan did a fair amount of work here, figuring out how to come up with robust techniques where I can fit this procedural model, if you will, to available data, either as point cloud data or mesh data. And you see two examples of some of the canonical maize genetics, right? So B73, for those of you who don't know, was the first maize genotype to be sequenced in 2008. It's the first plant to be sequenced after the Human Genome Project. And so with this, essentially, we have for design, we rely on this procedural representation. Now, for analysis, I'm going to make the case that implicit neural representation satisfies this data that on the left, right? So in terms of low memory footprint, ability to represent complex topology, and algorithmic alignment. Now, what essentially is an implicit representation? Here, an implicit representation essentially, if you take the circle, right? So, and if you have a point at some distance inside or outside the circle, essentially the implicit representation is a function that tells you how far away from the surface you are. And if you are inside the object, your distance to the interface is by notation assumed to be negative. And if you're outside the object, the distance to the surface is assumed to be positive. And so here's an example, and this essentially seems like you're representing this surface, which is a codimension. It's a two-dimensional object in three-dimensional space by a field, right, which is a 3D field, right? But the beautiful thing about this is that neural networks are very good at this, right? So this is what we move from an implicit representation to an implicit neural representation. So all you say, you train a neural network, when it's trained well, all you give it is XYZ, and this is a very compact, small neural network, and it tells you what the distance of that location XYZ is from the nearest interface. And so this satisfies a bunch of the qualities, the characteristics that we want, and then some from an analysis perspective. This is a fairly low memory footprint, even for very, very complex objects. So that means it'll fit. I don't have to worry about domain decomposition. Every processor, every node can have this compact neural network without the need to communicate across processor boundaries. I can represent complex topology and resolutions. It is algorithmically aligned with the reconstruction process, because in the reconstruction process, I'm using neural radiance fields, which is a neural network-based representation. Here is also a neural network-based representation. And because of the fact that these are neural networks, they are well tuned for accelerator-based evaluation in GPUs, as well as this allows us to differentiate these and create differentiable solvers. And so we explored this over the past 2 years. This is work by my student Samudra, who showed that INR is very versatile in its ability to represent complex objects, right? So, and for us, we are interested in slender objects. On the bottom left, you see here is a turbine blade, is turbine with very slender blades with sharp corners. You can also easily represent topologically extremely complex objects like this gyroid here. And INR, the implicit neural representation, is also very versatile in how you can train this INR, right? So you can train it based on images. If you have images of an object, you can train an implicit neural representation from just those images. If you have a point cloud data or a mesh data, you can train an INR. Or recently, there's been a lot of progress in creating generative models, right? There's large language models or large vision models that you use a verbal prompt to it, generate a bunny, and then it creates a neural implicit representation of that. So this is well aligned with recent progress in the AI discipline. So now we have gone through the challenge of how to construct and represent a complex structure. Let's look at how do we actually automatically perform multiphysics analysis here. And so again, if you think of, I give you a neural implicit representation, how would you actually use it in practice, right? So the first time I thought about it, this is the process I thought about. I'm going to query my implicit neural representation, and then try to identify my surface, and then I'm going to come up with either a voxelated object, or going to put in manual effort to reconstruct a body-fitted mesh for this, and then perform my analysis. But there's going to be if you do that, there's manual effort, as well as there's going to be some loss of accuracy as we go from marching cubes from an implicit representation to an explicit representation. So some of the desired characteristics of such an analysis pipeline that we want is, can I directly use this sign distance function that the INR provides, and such that I do not need to construct a body-fitted mesh. Second is, can I directly use this without having to explicitly find where the zero level set is going to be, right? And these are the two desired. And then from a design perspective, I want to have a minimal human intervention. And so the idea here is, if I don't want a body-fitted mesh, the approach is to go with immersed boundary methods, right? Which has been, for the past 50 years, we have made significant progress as a community in really advancing the state of the art in terms of how do I immerse an object in a background mesh, and then perform this analysis. But most methods, right? So, and the methods that I'm most familiar with are the finite cell method and the IMGA, the immersive geometric methods, require us to still identify the level set, the zero level set, for weak imposition of the boundary conditions, right? So I still integrate over the zero level set. And then there are other minor issues with such approaches in terms of load balancing and small cut cell, but the community is pushing forward to resolving these issues by various approaches. And again, even here at Iowa State, a bunch of us, led by Ming Cheng, are pushing to resolve some of these issues. But one method that's well aligned with this was the method designed by Scovazzi, which is called the shifted boundary method. And here, the advantage is that we remove the need to explicitly know or reconstruct the true surface, right? And this is the point that I made in the previous slide, that immersed methods are very good, but immersed methods also require us to impose boundary conditions on the true surface. But what if I don't want to compute the zero level set given this level set field, right? And so the shifted boundary method essentially shifts the imposition of the boundary conditions from the true boundary that you see in blue to a surrogate boundary, which is my background mesh, right? And so the idea, how does it do this? So let's look at this, right? So at a very high level, if I have a Dirichlet condition that I want to apply on my blue surface, or my true surface, U equals G, what is the boundary condition I should apply on my surrogate surface, G tilde, that produces the same effect as G on my true surface? So easiest way is I use a Taylor series expansion, right? And so I start from this unknown G tilde, I do Taylor series expansion, and then the Taylor series expansion tells me what my G should be here. right? And then I apply my Nishi's method, essentially the standard way of weak imposition of my boundary conditions on my true. Now I can do the same weak imposition on my surrogate. And what you see is when I replace my G tilde with what I compute, right? You see that there's only what is called D, the distance of my point to my interface, which is exactly what the implicit neural representation gives you, right? The INR, the implicit neural representation that we looked at before, essentially tells me what is my distance of a given point to the interface, right? And that's what. So now I can perform the imposition of the boundary conditions on a known background mesh rather than having to evaluate the zero level set, right? And so in this context, coming up with a good background mesh, we find that octrees are algorithmically perfectly aligned with this notion of the shifted boundary method along with the implicit neural representation. And so we have used this INR-based adaptivity. So you query the INR, the implicit neural representation, and it tells you the distance. Depending on the distance, we refine. And so we take extremely complex objects, and we are able to come up with very, very quickly very, very good meshes that are refined closer to the true surface without having to know explicitly what the true surface is. We are also able to get to do remeshing. So this is some extremely large-scale simulations that our former student Kumar Saurabh performed along with another former student Makarand Kanwale of this primary jet atomization, where we use this octree-based approaches to refine. And they also have essentially a very low memory footprint that translates to extremely good parallel performance. Right? And so we were able to do a bunch of simulations starting from using this notion of implicit neural representations plus the shifted boundary method plus octree-based techniques for starting with elliptic boundary conditions. And we found that for elliptic PDEs, Dirichlet conditions recover the expected convergence, but when you have Neumann conditions, because they require the second derivative, and so they require Hessian's calculations, they do require the expected convergence, but with quadratic elements close to the boundary, which we are currently we have gotten some initial preliminary promising results. Then after we finished exploring this using for simpler linear elliptic problems, we moved on to the Navier-Stokes problem. So the way we solve the Navier-Stokes is using the classical variational multiscale formulation with extra additional terms for the weak imposition of the no-slip condition on the surrogate boundary through the shifted boundary method. We use the backward difference formula, and currently we are also exploring semi-implicit schemes. Essentially, semi-implicit schemes allow you to move from a nonlinear solver to a linear solver with a slightly small reduction in time steps, and we are seeing some very promising results, right? And so we explored this with canonical problems, and I'm going to quickly go through a bunch of canonical problems, but as an interlude here for all of you cat lovers, here's a very complex geometry and then we run a flow simulation across this cat-like object at multiple Reynolds numbers, and we show that you're able to reconstruct the flow fields and compare extremely well with a painfully crafted body fitted mesh, right, at various Reynolds numbers, and we're also able to perform adaptive mesh refinement as needed based on a vorticity criteria. This is work 2D4 led by our recent student Chenggao Yang, who then took this method across a wide variety of canonical problems. Here, an example of a flow past an aerofoil at, I think, an angle of attack of 8 degrees. And then we see, here you see two things, right? We are able to capture the CL or CD across a whole range of angle of attacks. And this is at the Reynolds number of 1,000. And we are also able to do adaptive mesh refinement to capture the vorticity and other features. Now that's at laminar. We also did some work to check to see how well it looks at transition and turbulence scenarios. This is flow past a cylinder, again, using the shifted boundary method on octree meshes. And we are able to get this is at a canonical problem at 2700 Reynolds number. We are able to get good matches with a variety of statistics, both summary statistics as well as line cuts statistics. And then as an example, this is work done by Samudra, where he took the implicit neural representation of the very complex gyrard problem, constructed the surrogate octree mesh, and then use the shifted boundary method to solve for essentially flow through this pipe, through this membranic structure, right? So creating a body fitted mesh for this is going to be a nightmare. But with this, it is completely end-to-end. All you need is an implicit neural representation of this complex object. You hit go, and then the analysis and the mesh generation is automatic. The imposition is automatic, and then the solver solves the flow physics simulations, and you get very, very good results here. Now, then we extended beyond the Navier-Stokes to Navier-Stokes plus heat transfer, primarily because again, the goal is for us to simulate the plant canopy, right? So, and the physics in the plant canopy are passive scalar transport of carbon dioxide, temperature, as well as flow physics. And so here we show that a block iterative approach, Navier-Stokes plus X is passive scalar, or in this case, active scalar, works across a range of Neumann and Dirichlet conditions, and adaptive remeshing essentially results in efficient and scalable solvers. Finally, the key thing that we are currently working with, and perhaps maybe struggling with a little bit, is how do I utilize this technique, Navier-Stokes, around thin structures, right? So if you remember, most of my plants, most plants have, other than cacti and other succulents, have extremely thin and slender leaves. So how do we extend our framework formulation of octree-based shifted boundary method to look at thin structures? I think we are making some promising progress towards this. And so here you see on the left is we are able to reconstruct the pressure jump, drag, and wake when we compare with extremely refined body fitted meshes. And so putting this all together, right? So this is challenge number 2, putting this all together. Here's an example of a canonical plant. And then we apply a reasonable wind condition. This is about 0.1 meter per second. And then you see what the flow physics looks like here. Ideally, we want to progress towards simulating at realistic flow conditions between 0.2 to 2 meters per second, especially at higher wind loads for climatic extremes. And so this is a quick recap of our challenge number 2. Right, so we have a fully automated analysis pipeline. And so it requires, if we start with a procedural or an implicit neural representation of the object, then we go to and use an octree-based mesh refinement to reconstruct to represent the object. We use the shifted boundary method to efficiently apply the boundary conditions on this background mesh, a block iterative formulation for multiphysics, and then this we every step of the way we make sure that this method is scalable. And so this is work done by 2 of my students, Mehdi and a former student, Kumar Saurabh, who ensured that at every step of the way this framework is scalable, and we show fairly good scaling on leadership class machines. And so this is an example of the whole end-to-end framework that Samudra did. We have an implicit neural representation of a bunny, Stanford bunny, and you have flow across it using this technique. So now, in the remaining 10 minutes or so that I have, I want to talk about how do you actually then efficiently, we have finished with challenge number 1, our approach to challenge number 2, and then how do you essentially efficiently explore and design in this high-dimensional space. Right, and so one thing that we quickly realized is for the past decade or so, when you're pushing towards getting this individual simulations in its full glory of an agricultural field, individual simulations are still non-trivially expensive. Right, so each simulation can take anywhere between a couple of days to a week and a half on Frontera, Stampede, and local HPC machines. So then the natural thought, especially given that the challenge 1 was solved with AI-based enablers, we are currently exploring to see if surrogate models, especially AI-based surrogate models, specifically scientific machine learning surrogates, can help us. And a lot of people are exploring this, but we feel that agriculture problems provides a very unique challenge here. And the challenge is that we care about 3D structures. and these structures, 3D structures, are complex geometries with slender features. And so when we started looking at are there models that can do this, most of the, at least until this past year and the past 4 or 5 months, most of the data sets were essentially simple 2D geometries. And so we said, well, we got to contribute. If you want people to try to solve the problems that we care about, we got to contribute data sets to this. So using this framework, we spent significant computational resources to create large-scale these flow data sets in 3D, 2D, and 3D across complex geometries, right? So, and across a range of physics, including purely Navier-Stokes plus heat transfer, and then multi-phase flows too. And then across a range of shapes, as well as physics, steady state as well as transients. And then we have, if you look at the references at the bottom of the slide here, those are some of our, the flow bench data set is publicly available on Hugging Face. Please feel free to go check that out, where we have more than 10,000 simulations of different geometries in 2D and 3D, both steady state as well as transient, that provides a rich playground for the community to evaluate and design new neural PD solvers or scientific operator-based methods. Right? And so we took that. We took the training data, and I'm going to briefly allude to this, and happy to take questions later on if there are. So this is work again by my student, current postdoc, Ali Rabe, where he used the 3D data set that he has trained, that he has created, and training a bunch of the promising available scientific machine learning models, right? So this includes foundation models like Poseidon, transformer-based architectures like Scott, and then the depot nets and convolution neural operators and Fourier neural operators and so on. In terms of 2 sets of questions. First question is, which geometric representation to use? Should I use a mask or should I use a sign distance field? And our evidence suggests that sign distance fields are slightly better in terms of predictive capabilities to represent the flow features. Second is, the more important question is, how much data is sufficient to train such models, right? So like I said, creating these data sets are non-trivial. So we want to get away with the minimum amount of these field simulations that we can perform before we can actually legitimately start doing some design problems. And so we are so feel free to check out some of these papers that Ali and other co-authors from the group have published that detail some of these techniques. So now putting this all together, right? So in the last 5 minutes that I have here, how do we put this all together, right? So we start with a representation, a procedural plant, and then you perform multi-physics simulations, and then you do shape optimization in some sense, right? So, and for challenge 1 answers, how do you create and represent this complex architecture? Challenge number 2 answers, how do you actually perform analysis and extract out quantities of interest? And challenge number 3 offers a potential pathway for how can you perform design. And so version 0 that my student Nasla has been really pushing the envelope on is, as we are getting these tools in place, she said, well, I'm just going to try to see if I can design a plant that can maximize the amount of light that's being used. This is called PAR, photosynthetically active radiation. How much of the PAR is intercepted by a certain canopy? So she did a fair amount of analysis to compare, to ensure that her modeling platform matches with experiments that our colleagues have performed in the field over the last couple of years. We get good matching with experiments and numerical simulations, so we're confident that what we're doing is reasonable. And then she performed optimization of the architecture using the procedural model. So here is what the best plant we could get in the field, and this is what our predicted best plant is going to be, essentially. And so we are getting about from 48, how much light? This is the amount of light intercepted. This is about 48.7 megawatts of energy per acre. That's what the current best physical plant out in the field in Iowa can get at this packing density. And we show that with this kind of this kind of design, you can actually increase it by a non-trivial percentage, right? About 10 to 10% or more, 20% or so, right? So what is the characteristic of this, right? So, and then the characteristic of this is the leaves at the top are essentially erect. That means they allow more light to percolate down into the canopy. And then there's more area of the leaf area at the bottom is larger. And then one thing that, and this is something that when we showed it to our plant breeding colleagues, both in the public sector as well as some of our industry collaborators, they said, yes, this makes a lot of sense. This is what over the last 10, 15 years, plant breeders have been going towards, right? So making the top leaves more erect and then the bottom leaves more wider. But what we also found out, which they found very, very interesting, and this is essentially 3 or 4 weeks of simulations that provided insight that plant breeders would have taken several decades to end up at. And that's basically this notion of tiled structures, right? What we see is most often when breeders design for a plant architecture, if you see on the left here, the plants have leaves that don't shade their neighbors, but they do self-shading. What we found out is with a slight perturbation of the phyllotaxy, how the leaves are arranged, you can minimize not only inter-shading, but you can also minimize intra-shading between the plant, and that's what is the cause of the 20% increase, right? And so this is my last but one slide. I showed an end-to-end pipeline with the goal of how do we use computational mechanics and scientific computing to design the next generation, if you will, of plants and provide targets to our plant breeding colleagues, especially with the ability to perform CRISPR-Cas, right? To gene edit. You potentially can really accelerate how you can design plants. But our plant breeding colleagues need targets, designer targets, right? And this computational mechanics can provide us an opportunity to give those targets. And there are so many more applications of computational mechanics here, right? So how can I design the morphology of the stalk, right? So it can withstand wind loads. How can I look at multi-scale, multi-physics problems in photosynthesis, right? So that I can design better plants that are more resilient, right? So on. So this is, and I have a lot more of these problems that the mechanics and scientific computing community can I encourage us to participate in, because again, one thing is food security is national security, right? So we need food 3 times a day, and we need to make sure that we have the ability to feed our population, right? And so this is exciting opportunities for integration of computational mechanics with plant biology in agriculture. And I'm privileged to work with a great group of students, right? I get the opportunity to present, but a lot of the hard work is done by this set of group of fantastic colleagues and students and postdocs. And this is joint work, right? I emphasize that it takes a village to solve these kinds of problems. And this includes people from the agricultural field, as well as a lot of folks from the computational mechanics community. And finally, I end with thanking the sponsors who made this all possible, NSF and USDA and IFA. With that, I'm happy to take questions if there are any.
Great. Yeah, that was an excellent talk. So I would say clap right now, but I guess we have to do that virtually. So I'll try to do this with the clap emoticon there. Are there any questions? Yes, is that Matt Curry, or there's a hand raised, or MW Curry? Oh, maybe not. Okay. I had a few questions. Oh, wait, no, there is a hand raised. Is that Ramesh? Do you want to unmute yourself, or? Oh, there we go. We can't hear you, Ramesh. Or
No question. Sorry.
Okay, no worries. If that's Matt, did you want to ask?
Can you hear me now?
Yep, yeah.
Yep. Sorry, my mic was on the wrong setting. Thank you for the talk. Very interesting. I was curious with what the work you're doing. Like, a lot of it definitely has interactions with like the mechanics of plants, being that right, a throw through a dense thicket is going to change as things sway and move. And right, you're proposing geometries of plant configurations, and like, are the leaves, do the leaves have the structural strength to actually hold those types of positions? Have you looked into anything along those lines, or have planned work for that kind of thing? or like maybe find like, you know, how like are you proposing plant geometries that have material properties that are close to what are found in nature, or how far outside of like standard bounds are you looking at?
Excellent. That's where I said, if you look at the second point here, the morphology design essentially is designing the mechanical material overlay of the plant, right? And right now we are only looking at what should be the ideal geometry. And once we have the ideal geometry, or simultaneously, right, this is again a ripe area for work that we have just started getting into. How should I design the 2D cross section, right? So where should my vascular bundles go? Where should my soft tissue go? How much should my pit be, essentially, right? So, and that's purely again becomes a multi-scale mechanics problem. And again, that's a opportunity for all of us to contribute to if we are interested in. But that's the next set of questions that we are looking at.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, and then for your like your field scale modeling and your distance representation, like, is there any have you thought about how your method might apply if you need to do mechanical deformation as well in these studies?
Yeah. Great question. So stay tuned for that. So
okay.
we are this implicit neural representation to the octree to shifted boundary method. The next step that we are looking at is, can we do fluid structure interaction, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Other questions? So I had a couple of questions here. This was really fascinating. Actually, Matt asked one of mine, which is about the FSI. But I guess so I was curious what scales you're interested in. Like, are you interested in a whole field that's maybe a lot 10 by 10 kilometers or something like this, or are you looking at more like individual plants or a couple of plants? And I guess the reason I'm asking is I'm kind of you had mentioned the CPU times and taking from 2 days to 1.5 weeks. I was just curious, like how large of a simulation that would be for, because I imagine if you're trying to resolve each plant and you have like a 10 by 10 kilometer region or even bigger, this is going to be quickly very intractable.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of nuance to the answer here. It depends on what my quantity of interest is, right? Here, if my quantity of interest is going to be designing the architecture of the plant, so plant leaf size, leaf angle, number of leaves, and so on, then I need. So what we usually do is from a plant, from a commercial production agriculture perspective, you design a plant, and then you have a very specific planting density. Right, so you say, I'm going to plant, each plant is going to be 6 inches away from each other. That forms one row of plants. And the next row is going to be 30 inches away. And this is going to be a 100-acre farm. Right, so from a simulation perspective, I can take something right in the middle of the field, and I can assume periodic boundary conditions. Right, I can use a unit cell, and that's exactly how we are. So there, the complexity is I usually what we found out is you take 3 by 3, right? So about 9 plants, and then you look at the physics of that, especially if you want to design the plant architecture. But if you're looking at how this impacts hydrology, how this impacts water flow and all these things, then you need to look at larger scales. But I suspect that you don't need this amount of resolution that we are currently simulating. So short answer to my longer prelude here is for the kind of problems, design problems that we're looking at, we are only looking at a unit cell, right? And each unit cell has between 3 and 9 plants.
Okay. Do you also optimize like how close together or far apart to place them? Because that would be also interesting, I guess.
Great question. And that is limited. So we work very closely with our agronomy and plant breeding colleagues. And at least in the US, row crop agriculture is heavily mechanized. And that essentially puts a limit on how close you can plant things, right? Because the wheels of a tractor have to go through in between rows. And that puts a limit that the spacing between rows cannot be less than 20 inches.
I see.
So unless we have robotic platforms, and that's my third point here on the screen here, if you are able to have robotic small scale robots, then you can actually go on and design what the ideal planting patterns should be to maximize this, right? For now, they are all going to be in a lattice-based, in a row-based pattern.
I see. So Hannah has a question.
This was a really interesting talk. Thank you so much. I just have a quick question I think is maybe related to some of the other questions that people have been asking, but is there any work looking at the root structure and how that might relate to sort of access to nutrients and how to optimize that as well?
Yeah, excellent question. And I had this extra point on the slide saying root dynamics, but then I didn't have enough space, so I took that out. Maybe I should have put that in to resonate with the audience. But yes, I think the root architecture in agriculture, that's essentially the last great frontier, because you can measure, you can image everything above the ground, but measuring things below the ground is extremely difficult unless you do what is called shovelomics. You use a shovel and shovel the plant out and look at the and so there are a lot of opportunities here. We have not done that yet, but this is on our radar to figure out how to do this, and how the plant essentially how the root grabs on to the soil affects two things, right? So it affects both the structural stability when it comes to large winds, as well as the ability to forage for micro and macronutrients along with water. So yeah, you're right, absolutely right. I think this is also a design question, but we have not gotten there yet.
Do you plan to use existing root architecture models, or do you plan to create new ones using sort of the work that you've done here?
Yeah, at least for now, L systems and other kinds of representations of roots that seem to work reasonably well, and our intent is to see if we can try using those. But again, using that with an implicit neural representation. But happy to talk if you have ideas.
So much. That's super interesting. Thank you.
All right, maybe one last question if there is one. I guess I was just curious. I mean, you mentioned this PAR, the photosynthetically active radiation, as a optimization target. I would think like you would want to optimize something like crop yield. So is there there's a correlation between the PR and the crop yield, or just curious?
Yeah. That's a great question, Arina. So I think the ideal end product, the holy grail, is to match to yield. Okay. But what's happening here is there's just too much biochemistry and intermediate here that we don't have a good handle on from a first principles perspective, right? So there's how much. So and the reason. So the way we get in front of this is we say, I'm going to model what an adult plant looks like. So an adult plant essentially has reached what is called its reproductive state, and most of the photosynthesis essentially goes to what is called grain filling. It is going to, so all the photosynthesis, so there's no increase in height, there's no change in number of leaves. So then all the photosynthesis essentially is going to go into producing the fruit. And so that's where we very carefully framed the problem as saying, I'm only going to design my adult plant. I'm not going to design how the plant grows, essentially, because then there could be, we have to link that to yield.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. Okay, well, I think we're at time. So yeah, thank you, Baskar, for the very nice seminar.